meant to say UCC, I know that, but since he talked about his own books, continually using the word vanilla, not realizing that in terms of Elaine's genre, that has a particular meaning, but he's a very innocent young fellow. This is a hostile crowd, so on my first slide is a complete hostage to fortune, so I'll put it up quickly for about 10 seconds and then take it right down. So I would like to speak in praise of the culture and to say that that person, male or female, should be brought back to the centre of Irish politics rather than to the periphery. Exactly the opposite of what Joe said introducing this afternoon's sessions. I tried to work on the notion of something other than a stroke and maybe get the word political poke involved. But when I showed it to my daughter, she said, "You're going to talk about Facebook." So apparently it's, I don't mean the Facebook loose intrusion, but rather the impact of civil servants in prodding or in I think nudging is a more effective word, the bureaucrats to do what they should be doing. And I'm very taken by it. I'm very grateful to be asked here. I used to, although the chair said that I'm from Munster, and I normally say, I normally wouldn't say this, but I'm from Abbeyfield and my name is Collins. So, but I spent a lot of time in Donegal, so it's great to get back. But I hadn't expected to come back to a religious revival meeting, which is what I think this has the flavour of. It's been de rigueur to knock the church at every possible moment for everything. Apparently they're to blame for the weather. I think global warming was thrown in by one of the speakers this morning. But it does really feel like a religious event here, to the extent that some of the speakers and some of the congregation went this morning and immersed themselves in the chilly Atlantic waters, presumably for some religious benefit that they were going to get. And like a religious meeting, we got a text. Have you got the little booklet in there? Yeah. We were given a text to reflect on before we gave our speeches, and my text was on page 8, I think, here, and it said, in terms of national politics, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael were born of Civil War divisions about how to shape society. The practice of politics, yes, I've gone from page 2 to page 3, I will read it from here. The practice of politics became about the nature. Yeah, there's a misquote in the book, so I'll get it from my own. I had to look it up myself. Yeah. I'll give you the correct passage here. It's a good way to start, isn't it? Correcting the actual reading. It actually said, and I looked it up, the practice of politics became about the spoils of the system rather than engagement with the idea about the nature of citizenship. It is in this political culture about doing favours to get re-elected, pulling strokes, Mayfainism rather than national interest that corruption we have seen over several decades, and indeed since the foundation of the state has been allowed to foster. Now, I actually kind of disagree with that fundamentally, and my actually area of research interest currently is in China. My forthcoming book, which will sell a lot less copies than Pat's and a lot less than the other book referred to earlier on, will be in all good bookshops in August. But it looks at a country where they really do corruption. He might be called Ming, but Bo Xilai, he's not. The notion that we should have a week of complete introspection seems to me to be unhelpful. There's not a single paper here, as far as I can see, on a non-Irish experience. And it partly, I think, is to do with the notion that we need to feel guilty, perhaps, in a post-Catholic world. So let me say, mea cultura, mea maxima cultura, and apparently it's in the ablative. I got that checked before I came out. And to say that my central thesis is that the level of corruption is overestimated, that discretionary judgments and localism should be valued, that we need fewer judges, not more, in the system, and that more parliamentary democracy would ensure accountability. So I can feel your hostility already. And if there is a need for more transparency and accountability, ministers are the problem, not TDs. Now, I have no doubt that there was a sense of scandal and hurt among the electorate after the revelations of the tribunals regarding the scale of corruption, the money involved, the range of business and political figures implicated. And in an atmosphere of scandal, many now assert that all politicians are guilty of corruption. In the latest Eurobarometer report on attitudes of Europeans towards corruption, 86% of Irish people surveyed agreed that corruption was a major problem within Ireland. 70% thought that the government's efforts to combat corruption are not effective. But I think the debate a lot of the debate we've been having about transparency and accountability is replete with non-evidence-based diagnoses. For example, it is not true that greater levels of corruption are associated with greater levels of state spending or the scope of state activity. The countries that come at the top of the non-corrupt league, the rather reverse transparency index, are those with very high spending from the social democratic countries of Scandinavia. But we allow this to go on because it makes us feel better without, I think, looking at the evidence. And the evidence, it seems to me, is that for most Irish citizens, their interaction with the state is routine and at a local level. There is no expectation that bribes are required to obtain or facilitate services from local government, state or related agencies. And despite the infrequent occasions of corruption in Ireland, for the most part, the bureaucracy is not extractive or arbitrary. I spent some time this year in India, statements you couldn't possibly say about there. Local government outside planning, I know that's a big caveat, in local government outside planning, corruption is, I suggest, fairly incidental. And that it occurs where politicians have a direct role in deciding specific and individual policy decisions of high value to wealthy business interests, bread-seeking opportunities in the jargon. Where civil servants routinely exercise discretion over commercially valuable decisions in the context of lax accountability and ambiguous policy objectives. I think the Common Agricultural Policy is full of those. And where ministerial decisions are both commercially charged and policy criteria are insufficiently explicit. But these conditions are, I feel, infrequently fulfilled and are seldom the experience of citizens. When citizens seek the intervention of a politician, not uncommonplace in Ireland, money and favours are not exchanged. And yet, 65% of citizens think that giving and taking of bribes is widespread among our politicians. Yet Transparency International, who do collect evidence and who do publish their evidence, summarised in the Irish country study, Ireland has made substantial progress in strengthening legal and institutional safeguards against corruption over the past 15 years. In addition, the scale of petty corruption is perceived to be amongst the lowest measured anywhere in the world. So it seems to me, to get the scale of what we're looking at here wrong, also invites the danger of also getting the prescription wrong. And the result of this approach, it seems to me, is increased cynicism. And you can see that in the literature from other countries where the rhetoric is high, the measures are low, and cynicism is the result. And for me, if we are going to redesign the system, then it must be congruent in some way with the values and experiences of the jurisdiction. The last session was giving out that nothing ever happens. There's always promises nothing ever happens, and the blame was being spread around. Possibly nothing ever happens because the analysis is wrong in the first place. And if we spent a bit more time on that and looking outside of ourselves, less introspection, less religiosity about the whole thing, then we might get to a more sustainable reform process. As the Dawn Lister said last night, you can't legislate for honesty, and no matter what voting system you have, the outcomes will reflect our broad political culture. Our legislators are concerned with local issues because Irish people want them to be and reward them for such behaviour. They do so knowing that their vote can be differentiated from the crowd, and the data backs this up. As Michael Marsh told an Oireachtas committee recently, all the evidence is that people like their particular politician, the one for whom they vote. They just don't think much of the rest of them. And for any one candidate, getting between 7,000 and 8,000 first preference votes is enough to secure election. I know you can go much lower than that, but the rational candidate will have a figure like that in their mind. And this means garnering personal support by being active locally. But critics of this activity, it seems to me, undervalue constituency work because they juxtapose it with some supposedly more lofty activity, like our quote did. I can't lost the quote again, but anyway, like our text did, brothers and sisters, as if we could ascribe to legislators. Oh yeah, I've got it here. Something engaging with the ideas of the nature of citizenship. I'd prefer you to help me to get my daughter off a trolley, but if you want to engage with the nature of citizenship, that'll be fine. A similar idea, which I think is fairly bankrupt in our system, which we just has trotted out the whole time, is the idea that we have non-political civil servants, or bureaucrats in general. In formal terms, the delivery of public services in Ireland is fashioned on the Wilsonian dichotomy. I didn't bother with that slide, I think, but somebody mentioned Tammany Hall this morning. I think it was Frank. The reaction to the Tammany Hall experience under actually the only professor of public administration ever to become president of the United States, Woodrow Wilson. So good luck to Woodrow. After I hear that Woody Guthrie was named last week, just a useless piece of information. Anyway, the distinction between policy and administration is bogus, I think. The formula assigns general issues of allocation to politicians and specific entitlements to bureaucrats. However, the notion that you can make this separation, it seems to me, is unhelpful. For example, it asserts that public servants are politically neutral, even those who were lauded this morning. I noticed this, apparently public servants are much more to be trusted if they've studied economics and are economically literate and somehow competent. And apparently planners live in a really reified existence where their value judgments are simply the translation of technical decisions, it would appear. Now, while it may be that they're non-partisan, few, I think, would agree that our civil servants, the thoughts of our civil servants, the beliefs of our civil servants are irrelevant to the political process. The insights of Simon and Lindblom and others show that bureaucracies exhibit a larger measure of irrationality and have distinctive goals of their own. Why wouldn't they? How could you work in an area of public policy for your entire life and be expected not to have firm views? You hang around waiting for some politician to come through the door to tell you what the best policy is likely to be? Very unlikely, it seems to me, just incredible. And it's clear in our system that the politicians are active in trying to influence policy. Clearly they do that. I've just said that. And they're much more engaged in this than they are in the notion of designing and directing from a distance. However, the supposed dichotomy between the role of the politician and the role of the bureaucrat is a limiting perspective for an analysis of contemporary political activity and public service management. In Ireland, the politician is described as a specialist for the bureaucratically illiterate. I feel like that myself. I've been dealing with the Arts Council for a week. It's the working class who use the clientelist system most. It's social welfare, housing, medical entitlement, cases that dominate the deputies' caseloads, whatever about marrying their daughters and looking after their lizards. These customer complaints may not be heard if not facilitated by the politicians. And it's important to note that the evidence from case studies suggests that this activity is fairly low-key anyway and fairly routine. Now, I make the big exception here in relation to ministers. You know, lots of TDs will claim to have influenced school buildings or sports facilities or lottery grants, what have you. We all know they haven't, but ministers have. So I'd leave ministers to one side, a different category. Well, I'll leave the ministers because you covered it in all that my department stuff this morning. So I won't repeat all that. Just my department, a shorthand for the next paragraph I was going to give. So I'll press on. One line of argument is that if we streamline the bureaucracy sufficiently and make them service-orientated, then there'll simply be no need for citizens to require the pervasive intervention of politicians. In time, this activity would become to be seen as a nuisance and wasteful. The counter-argument is that this activity can have an important and beneficial role in public service provision. And its denigration and diminution of that role is seen as a result of poor communications between the citizen and the state, and constantly reduce the quality of public service. I suppose I should really explain that. But my point here is just to go into the script for a second. I think the image of the bureaucracy is the bureaucrats who make clean decisions. In a lot of cases, they do. You go in, you describe yourself, yes, you're entitled to this, here it is. But in many cases, that isn't the case. And there are other things that they should know, other things that they should hear. And hearing them and knowing them will lead to better decisions. That's essentially my point. And so I suggest, therefore, that the self-interests of politicians in appearing influential could be harnessed in the process of service delivery in a way which is analogous to local managers of multiple outlet commercial operations. So you go to QuickFit, you go to Aldi, whatever these places. Your car is that year, it's that make, your demand is for this or that or what have you. It's clear-cut. There is no real discretion there. And yet the management literature is full of telling us about the role of the local manager in getting on to headquarters, asking for exceptions, asking for later opening hours on days, recognizing local sports teams, all that kind of stuff. And that's this kind of thing that management schools teach you to do. Tom Peters and the other people whose books you buy in airports, you know, these management books are supposed to, by the time you've arrived in Paris, you'll be a better manager, regard the local person, the local annoyance, as a hero. And that's how I'd like to have the cute her restored. I mean, it's a bit invective, I know, but I'd like to see the cute her as hero. And I think it's unfair to do that. I can see I'm not winning here. All right, okay, I'll pass on from that. But I would, so I won't give you the rest, but I would say that we are in an economic mess which has come from not making the right policy decisions. But if we had listened to more of the complaints which pointed out that a guard and a nurse married couldn't get a mortgage and couldn't afford a house, don't listen to the regulators telling you it's all about competition. Competition will get it right. Some of the time, the evidence, the data, built up from the customers. Sometimes the customers are right, not at the Arts Council. I was told to get off the Arts Council thing. It's just annoyed me, that's it. Right, I'll leave the Arts Council alone. Right. The research from other countries suggests that to get rid of corruption, what you need to do is have more democracy. But not just more democracy. We have lots of countries, which have been given democratic institutions in a very short period of time. They're in Eastern Europe, they're in former colonial countries in Africa, etc. They descend very quickly into corrupt systems. You have to stick with the democracy. You have to have faith. I told you this was a religious meeting. You have to have faith. Now, my other points, I'm rapidly on to the next. I'm nearly finished. I've only got these points. That's all I want to make. I feel a valuable part of our system are judges. I was in agreement mostly with what was said here about the need to protect the legal system. Sorry, not everything that Pat didn't say, I was in agreement with. The need to keep it sacred. And part, however, as somebody over there was suggesting, it would be easy to have a go at the judges. Well, they're all D4, rugby playing, probably right-wing Catholics, whatever. What are they? Come on, throw a few more insults. I'm sure we could collect one. Before the end of the afternoon, we would have a real populist attack at the judges. We must protect the legal system from that danger. And while it's understandable in the initial shock and scandal of the corruption system, say, what's the cleanest bit of the system? How can we use it? We'll go for the judges. In the long run, that can't be sustained because it won't be very long before a judge will make a spectacular mistake. An unpopular decision, a clearly wrong decision, and then the rhetoric will start and we'll undermine the judge. I was pleased that as I was actually here, one of my postgraduates texted me a reference. They're always so bloody late. But on the phone, I was able to look it up. Apparently, the Medical Council have done some research about who you would believe. And I don't have the whole thing here because it's a very small screen on my phone. But I was able to pick out professors at 72%. I suggest that's declining every minute. But judges weren't far behind at 71. TDs were down at 12. Avril, I'll have to say that senators weren't ranked at all. But if we are to protect that part of the system, we should stop using them in politically charged circumstances. That's my view. And this is the faith part, this is the clue. So I'm giving out about people not using the evidence, people not looking at other countries, not looking at the data, etc. And then my conclusion is completely about not looking at the data. So my conclusion is a belief thing. I believe that if we were to have more faith in our legislature, stick with them longer, not just go through to the next shaggy TD story, but stick with them for a longer period of time, then we would get to the high levels of transparency and accountability that we require. And even though the people who won't be asked the same question again, they'll just be asked it differently, rejected the referendum, even those people, 74% of the people who replied to the Red Sea poll said they were in favour of greater investigative powers to Parliament. So to combat political corruption in Ireland, I think, is in part a matter of faith in the strength of the tradition of our representative democracy. It is necessary that we do put in place the kinds of things that we've been spoken about this morning in changing the rules. But the rules enough won't do it. We need our parliamentarians to share in a renewal of their ethical standards and show ethical leadership and stay with it over a longer period of time. And that's more likely, it seems to me, to bring us to a better political place than complicated new electoral systems, reducing, increasing, expanding, declining the numbers of politicians, etc. It's a matter of faith. It's a religious meeting. Thank you. I don't know how to get the back now.